Synapse is dead. And it's not dead in terms of it's still gonna continue on. But I ended up on a Synapse blog page, and it was a very active blog, like 3 or 4 articles sometimes a day. And then all of a sudden, it just radio silence for like 2 or 3 months after Fabric launched. It's like, oh yeah, I don't think there's much going on in the Synapse world these days.
Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Data Driven Podcast. So today, very special guest. It's Greg Deckler, and Greg is the vice president at a global technology consulting firm. He's also a 7-time Microsoft MVP. He's an author. His recent writings around mastering Microsoft Power BI. So, Greg, thank you for joining and welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Well, great. So we got a lot of stuff to get into today because I would encourage listeners out there to go to Greg's LinkedIn page. It's a lot of great stuff there, and actually really funny too. So you got to go check that out. But Greg, talk to me about how you got into doing what you're doing. Tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and how you got to the path of what you're doing today.
Yeah, sure. So it's kind of interesting in terms of I'm pretty well known in the Power BI community, but I don't actually do that for my job. I got into using Power BI because I run a technology consulting practice around Dynamics 365 actually. And so I got into using Power BI to track my practice and report on my practice and make sure that, everybody's utilized and have stuff to do. I got into it, the same way probably a lot of people do is I get an Excel spreadsheet every week or every month, and I'd have to do a bunch of formatting on it and then, build a report off of it. And I'd have to do that every single time. And so when I started using the power tools in Excel, it allowed me to automate, all of that data cleanup and transformation. And it's really how I ended up getting into Power BI, and I've been following it ever since.
Even on your LinkedIn page, you're sort of goading Microsoft to address their shortcomings in Power BI, like what's it, day 4704 about that matrix totals are broken. It looks like you post to that daily. So it sounds like you use Power BI and the Power Tools a lot in what you do, like you mentioned. So what is it? Are you friend, foe? It sounds like you have a complicated relationship with Microsoft.
You might say that. I guess. It's been an interesting relationship with them in terms of all of that, right? I was an MVP for 7 years. And I'm no longer an MVP for an unspecified code of conduct violation. They've never told me what exactly I did. But yeah, it was an interesting experience being an MVP, because you feel this overwhelming need not to criticize the product, or at least, if you're going to criticize and you're like, well, it's not so bad because, you kind of caveat, your criticisms and that sort of thing. You can see that in some ways. In fact, some of the other MVPs have pointed out, well, Greg, you said that totals were technically correct. I'm like, yeah, I did that when I was an MVP. I wrote that article, and I felt the need to caveat the fact that they're wrong, but I always felt that they were wrong and stupid. The way they worked, and that they should work more like an Excel pivot table where you have options to be able to say, hey, I want the average, or I want the, just sum up the rows, or you have a lot more options in Excel, and I don't know why Power BI doesn't have those. But once I was no longer an MVP, there's a whole realm of content and topics that opened up for me, and I could actually just speak my mind and say things like the way I see them. And I'm not saying I'm always right or anything like that, but I have an opinion, and I tend to express my opinion.
Yeah, look, it's refreshing, right? Because you do express your opinion. Look, there's got to be a love there for the product because you do use it, and you have extreme detail about what it's good at and where its shortcomings are. So, and a lot of people follow you. So obviously, what you talk about is pretty relevant and important So much so that you've, written a book about it. You want to
Yeah.
talk a little bit about the book that you wrote with your partner?
Well, so I've actually written six books. The latest one actually I wrote with Rick DeGroot and Melissa DeCorte is the
Hmm.
definitive guide to Power Query M. Before that was the one you mentioned, Mastering Power BI with Brett Powell. And then I've written a couple, Learn Power BI first and second edition, DAX Cookbook, Power BI Cookbook second edition with Brett Powell again. I think that's all six of them. And I'm working on Power BI Cookbook third edition as we speak, actually. So we're actually in the second, into the draft phase. All the drafts are done, and then I just have to, get the technical editors to review them, make all the corrections, and then that one will be out hopefully later this year. But yeah, I do have a real passion for the software. I mean, I got into it early, and it really helped me in my job. And I don't know, I sort of just got into the community. I, started a user group, and I really was very active in the community forums, which is, I think, is maybe there's some other people that are as active as I am, maybe not for as long as I've been, but it is one place where you see a lot of the limitations and you see what the users themselves are struggling with in Power BI. And of course, number one is measure totals, right? It comes up every day on the forums. And really, the whole thing about why I started the meme campaign was I think I had a breakdown one day after answering the measure totals problem like four times, with there was like on one page and I had, there were four of them, and I have a macro for it. And I'm just like, this is ridiculous. This comes up every day. Why don't they just fix this thing? And so I posted a meme about it, and it just kind of took off from there.
Well, so I mean, one of the things that's interesting is that they, for a big company like Microsoft to be releasing updates to Power BI as often as they do is pretty impressive, right? So have you seen? I mean, I know that at least they started out monthly. Are they sort of keeping to that pretty aggressive schedule of updates to Power BI?
Yeah, they have. I mean, that's the other thing that really attracted me to that to the software was that it's a complete reversal from the way Microsoft developed software in the past, right? I've been using Microsoft software for all of the 30 years I've been doing this professionally in terms of consulting. And you got used to the standard, a 3-year refresh cycle, right? And I was, for example, I was big into a Microsoft Exchange at one point back in the mid 90s and late 90s, and did that for almost a decade in terms of Exchange consulting and migrations. And you had that 3-year upgrade cycle where you basically had to go back and relearn all the product again. And it was really kind of refreshing to see Power BI take a much more agile approach to things. And they have kept up with it over the years. I mean, they release one every month except for January's. They always skip January. But I think the pace has slowed down recently with Fabric. I did a couple of videos on my YouTube channel, Microsoft Hates Greg, on this subject, where it was like, hey, there's a big slowdown in terms of things getting into GA, and you really you can track it almost right back to when Fabric started, which was actually as the private preview for that was called Trident at the time.
So, Greg, I mean, you sort of got us into this the subject of Fabric, and you've written a 3-blog series. Is Fabric and Direct Lake a game changer for Microsoft? What is the sort of key takeaways there? I mean, why is it, do you think, that Microsoft launched into doing something pretty radically different when it comes to Fabric and sort of using Power BI as sort of like the lead horse in that strategy? I don't know. What do you think?
Well, my opinion is that I think Synapse, and a lot of this is anecdotal in terms of what I see in the market, and in terms of, because my company I work for has a data strategy practice, and I followed that pretty closely. And it seemed like Synapse was losing in the market overall. And anecdotally, they maybe would win 20% of the deals that would come their way. They'd lose out to Databricks or Snowflake. So I think they've kind of felt they needed to do something different. And it's kind of classic Microsoft strategy. Well, let's take something that people love, Power BI, and leverage that to try to prop up this other technology that's not doing so well in the market. That's my opinion. It's purely my opinion. But that's, if I had to say that's what Microsoft is doing. I mean, that's, to me, that seems very obvious to me that is what is going on.
Yeah, it seems like there's no talk about Synapse anymore, is there? I mean, at least in my experience, I've seen the same thing. We support a variety of platforms, including Synapse. Um, but I think maybe, I mean, I could count them on one hand, customers that went the Synapse route, compared to what I call the big three: Snowflake, Databricks, and then BigQuery.
BigQuery, yeah.
So is Synapse like in the rearview mirror as far in your opinion for Microsoft, and is it leading with Fabric and OneLake?
I did another video where I said Synapse is dead, and it's not dead in terms of it's still gonna continue on. It'll still be around until at some point in the future they'll sunset it, I'm sure. But it was kind of stark. It was a few months after Fabric launched. I went to the Synapse. I ended up on a Synapse blog page, and it was a very active blog, like 3 or 4 articles sometimes a day. But definitely, almost every day they were posting blog articles and updates and everything. And then all of a sudden, it just radio silence, for like 2 or 3 months after Fabric launched. I was like, oh yeah, I don't think there's much going on in the Synapse world these days, as far as anything new.
Yeah, it's like, I think you're right. That's a pretty good signal that they've moved on. So they always say, Microsoft takes a couple tries to get it right. So, do you think they're on the right path with Fabric?
I mean, it's a path. It can't be worse than parallel data warehouse, which is where all this started, right? Way back in the day, and then Azure SQL data warehouse, and I can went, if you talk about a few attempts to get it right, think they've been through 4 or 5 now, and now we're on to Fabric. I mean, it really doesn't matter because Fabric is the future as far as I can see. Really, it's Power BI even as a standalone platform. I think basically you can still buy Pro and use Power BI standalone that way, but really for enterprise customers that were using Premium, that is no longer a standalone product anymore. That's you're not even going to be able to buy it come June 25th or something like that. And then enterprise customers, once their enterprise agreement runs out, they'll have to convert their premiums to Fabric and all of that sort of thing. So regardless if it's whether the right course or not, it's the course we're on.
So, Greg, and sort of that, with that strategy, what do you think, how do you think Microsoft and Power BI as a sort of standalone visualization platform going forward, given that they're sort of obviously going to favor their own data platform, right? What's that mean for the Snowflakes and the Databricks and the BigQueries, the other data platforms, when it comes to Power BI support going forward? I'm getting on. It's your opinion, and I'm asking you hypotheticals here, but what do you think that means going forward for those platforms?
Yeah, man, that's a good question. I don't see Power BI going away from its roots where it's got a connector for everything. You can connect, literally, you can connect, and they always come out with new connectors every month. It seems like there's 5 or 6 or 12 new connectors for Power BI. I mean, I really don't see that changing so much. Yeah, it's going to be interesting in terms of with this that they've tried to tightly bundle Power BI and Fabric together when there's really no reason to do it. Power BI Premium could stand on its own, just like it has for years. But they really want to tightly bundle it to Fabric, I think, to basically make Fabric succeed. And I think the overall strategy, I think I kind of pointed out in my blog series, was first they're gonna create linked servers so that you can link to your from Fabric, you can create a link server to your Snowflake or your Google BigQuery or your Databricks. And then, now we can use, analytic capabilities in Fabric which is really just Power BI. But I suppose if you want to do like data engineering or, machine learning and that sort of stuff, that you can do that through linked servers and that sort of thing. But again, it's a mystery to me in terms of how it's all going to succeed or how Microsoft thinks it's going to succeed. Because, other than the fact that, okay, now that you've linked there and you can show that you can do stuff in Fabric on these linked servers, well, you're really just paying for the same thing twice, because you're paying for Snowflake and you're paying for Fabric and you're paying for Databricks and you're paying for Fabric. So I think that's the long-term play, because I just don't see a lot of other areas where Microsoft could really gain traction. I mean, 80 to 90% of Power BI users are really just business users. I don't see them going out and building data warehouses and doing, writing Python code. I mean, most of them have trouble writing DAX code or Power Query code. I don't see them, jumping on the Python bandwagon and going down the data, machine learning route and writing Jupyter notebooks and things like that. I think that's beyond most business users. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but so really the market for Fabric really is the Synapse users that were using Synapse, but there's no clear migration path to Synapse to Fabric. You basically almost have to start over. So I don't know. It's a mystery to me sometimes what Microsoft does.
It's like I kind of look at it and think of it is their strategy using sort of Power BI as the wedge to get the data platform workloads, steal them from, from Databricks and Snowflake and BigQuery. Because if you make that integration with Power BI and Fabric so good, it might convince users to say, "Hey, let's just use Fabric as a lakehouse architecture." Since my main consumers are consuming the data through Power BI. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's really the kind of the direct lake route, right? In terms of you build something in Fabric and immediately you've got a semantic model, that's in direct lake mode that is, you can then go and build reports off of and everything else versus, okay, you go build that in Snowflake and then you have to connect to it from Fabric/Power BI and then build your reports. I don't think it's a huge lift either way. And the interesting thing is a lot of the people that I talk to with in the community, they're like, yeah, the worst thing is that would you just not build the default model because I'm never going to use that. I just want to build my own.
I hated that too. That was my first reaction is what the hell is this thing? Number one. And it's not a default model because this is basically everything. With absolutely no model at all. I mean, it's like, it's like, can I delete this? No. It's like, I'm with you on that. That's kind of lame, but I get where they're going with it. They're trying to make it seem like it's seamless. So I also noticed, Greg, that they changed the terminology from data set to semantic model.
Yep. And I still, if I said data set at any point during this talk, I still fall into bad habits.
So just to sort of put a bow around that. So, what would be your sort of advice to potential customers, prospects, when it comes to Microsoft Fabric as part of the overall data strategy? What would you say to them?
Honestly, what I've been saying for the last, year has been, wait for it to go GA. It's like every other Microsoft product. Wait for it to go GA and then wait a year or two, before you even bother. And I think that's been proven out just from just the whole host of limitations that Fabric has, and just even in just me trying to do some simple things with Fabric, it's just one roadblock after another. It has been very frustrating. Again, I've got a lot of videos out on my YouTube channel about all that. Where I'm just trying to build I just want to build a a billion row data set or something like that, and it just proves almost impossible. Actually, the funny part was I ended up resorting to Perl in order to generate my data set, my data file, and get it loaded up into Fabric, that's a whole.
Wow. Yeah. Do you think they're going to get it right, Greg, eventually?
They'll get it right eventually. The question is, will it be too late? By the time they get it right. I think everything about Fabric really seemed rushed to me. They had the GA, the private preview announcement was in May of 2023, and then it went GA in October. And it was, in my opinion, and I'm not the only one that's saying this, it was not ready for GA. But I think, Microsoft really figured that it was now or never. They decided it was now or never. They had to do something, or they were just going to completely be an also ran, in the data analytics space. So I think they've tried to freeze the market through a big announcement, at May 2023 at Microsoft. I can't even remember the conference. They keep changing it on me, but the name. but the big one they hold every May. And yeah, I think they just felt it was now or never, and they had to really get this out there and kind of freeze the market, get it released, get people starting to play with it. It's kind of funny. They released a 60-day demo, right? I think I'm a year and some change later. I think I'm still on day 27 or 24 of my 60
Yeah,
days.
they never started that countdown for me either, Greg. It was like, wow, thanks, Microsoft. I love using that. But
Well,
then when I tried to upgrade to the bigger capacity, Greg, it's like it was still pointing to the trial capacity. I mean, it was insane. I don't know what's going on behind the scenes, but there's some crazy architecture stuff behind the scenes there, that I ran into. And you know what they told me? They said, like, you know what, I tried because I wanted to run my models on a larger capacity, and they're like, you have to rebuild your models in the larger capacity. It's like, what? What do you mean? You know how long it took me to build the models on the trial capacity, and now I got to rebuild them on a larger capacity? Who's what are you talking about? They closed my ticket. That was the solution.
I mean, it's kind of interesting because, I mean, even in Power BI Premium, if you had multiple capacities, you could move models between, oh, I want this workspace in this capacity, or I want this workspace in that capacity. So, I mean, it's just, again, just the limitations of Fabric will drive you crazy right now, which is, I mean, I'd say give it a while before let them hammer out all of these kind of kinks and weirdness and limitations. And then then maybe it'll actually be something that'll blow your socks off. I don't know.
Fair enough. All right, so let's change topics to what everybody else is talking about now, which is Gen AI. So I want to get your take on, what do you think? How do you think what's happening in Gen AI and LLMs? How do you think that affects business intelligence going forward, Greg?
Well, I mean, so Brian Julius has done some really good work around some of that in terms of he's been using Copilot, or not Copilot, ChatGPT 4, and building his own LLMs, in terms of they're trained on his Power BI models themselves. And if you do that, then the DAX, starts to get really smart about writing the DAX for you. So I think, we've seen Microsoft go down the path, at least in like the dynamic CRM space, or sales. They've added the ability, like if you're looking at a list in there, you can say, hey, build me a Power BI report off of this. And it'll try to basically, guess what you want to know about this, whatever is the view that you're looking at within Dynamics and that sort of thing. And that could be really powerful stuff if they'd ever bring that over to the finance and supply chain side, which is where I spend a lot of my time, actually. So I don't know. It's one of those things where it feels like AI and generative AI is really the next big thing, but like nobody really understood what, when the internet came out. I was coming out of college and I've been using the internet for years, and I'm trying to tell people about it, and they're like, yeah, I don't really get it, and maybe I think it's just a fad. It's the same kind of commentary that some of it that I see now, but nobody really understood how big and how important the internet was really going to be in the grand scheme of things back in 1994, let's say. I think the same about generative AI. I think it's going to be huge, but in terms of just the exact impact of it, I don't even think people can really wrap their head around just how big of an impact it's going to have.
Yeah, I have the same feeling, Greg. It feels like, because I was also active at the same time when the internet was born, and I think that well, chatbots are sort of like a killer app. It's like that's probably not going to be the app that's really going to make Gen AI transformational for us going forward. I'm just waiting to see how pornography uses Gen AI, because that seems to always be the catalyst for new technology acceptance in the market.
Unfortunately, that is very true. I have a feeling. It probably was a large driver of why the internet became successful to a large degree, I suppose.
So given that, like, how do you think businesses, enterprises, what should they be doing right now with Gen AI? Should they be what advice would you give them in terms of how much time they spend, or whether they just wait for this stuff to play out?
I mean, I think if you wait too long, you're going to miss out on some of the competitive advantage. But yeah, I mean, what I've seen people do that's a mistake in some companies is that, oh, let's just turn Copilot on and turn, send, have it go and point it at our data that's sitting out in OneDrive and Teams and all of that sort of thing. That's a big mistake. Don't do that, because you're going to run into all kinds of security and privacy type of risks that you have no idea about before. So I think companies need to be cautious with it, and they need to take a very strategic approach to it in terms of, hey, let's first make sure that our data landscape, we know what it is, and work out like the security and the things like that around all of this. Otherwise, they're going to get themselves in a lot of trouble, I think.
Yeah, you really can't. You really can't skip the basics, can you? I mean, your data needs to be in well enough shape with good governance behind it before you can unleash it on the world, or on your internal world at least. So I've been talking a lot about, Greg, about the importance of the semantic layer for bringing business context and that governance layer into something like an LLM. So, you've seen a lot, Greg, when it comes to natural language query. Is it just a nice demo, or have you seen people actually use natural language query to good effect?
Are you talking about the Q&A feature in Power BI?
Yeah.
Or
Oh, yeah. Or it's just like, being able to, write English rather than having to point and click and drag and drop. What do you think?
well, I mean, I hope that the co-pilot and all of that makes Q&A actually usable within Power BI.
Hmm.
It's the number one most demoed feature that I've ever seen. Microsoft loves the demo Q&A, but none of my customers use it. I mean, it's a nightmare to build a good Q&A model, and keep it
Hmm.
up to date with all the synonyms and everything else. That needs to become much easier. And if Microsoft can leverage Copilot to do that, I'm sure they'll just rebrand Q&A to Copilot for Power BI and call it a day. I think they've already maybe started doing that. They also, I think, all of a sudden Power Virtual Agents is no more, and now it's like Copilot. Then now it's these Power Virtual Agents it's really AI.
Hmm. Yeah. We know how that all works, don't
Yeah,
we?
all of a sudden every tagging, and it's funny because all the software vendors that we deal with, every one of them has an AI spin on their product now, regardless of whether it was already an existing feature or not. It's been rebranded AI.
Yeah, I just, God, that makes me so angry. It really does. Because you just know it's just like, oh, come on, just jumping on the bandwagon. It's like, I mean, customers and prospects know the real deal, that you can't just change the messaging on your website and all of a sudden it's like they should be interested in buying a product when they weren't interested before. So that drives me crazy. It certainly does.
Yeah, I mean,
So
I think it's more real than like big data. Like that would, you never hear big data thrown around anymore. That was that, people, but everybody back in the day, like, I don't know, 15 years ago, it was, oh, regardless of what else, oh, this is big data. So,
I love it. I love it. So Greg, just this has been fantastic, and I would encourage all the listeners out there, if you're into Power BI, if you're looking to get into Power BI, if you want to get better at Power BI, start with Greg and start with the stuff he's written. It's really super good, approachable, actionable, which is why I love your writing. So, what do you think? What kind of advice would you give the listeners out there, Greg, about anything? You've seen a lot. You worked with a lot of customers. So, what kind of advice would you give them as they sort of dive deeper into analytics and data?
yeah, I mean, my overall core philosophy in life is not to overcomplicate things, right?
Hmm.
And keep it simple. So start simple, and try to do simple things, and keep your data models as simple as possible to get the job done. And then, and just start small and work your way up. And naturally, you'll add, as your requirements increase and as business requirements change, and that you're gonna eventually add complexity, and you're going to get into more complex topics, and that all will happen naturally as an evolution. Don't try to go out and boil the ocean right off the bat. Start small and work your way through it.
That's fantastic advice. I completely agree. I live my life by those same terms. So, thank you, Greg. So with that, Greg, thank you for a great chat today, and thank you for listening, listeners out there, and stay data driven. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Dave.